As the songs of awakening rang through, the world was created. The silence was broken.
Middle-earth, with its rolling hills, broken mountains, flowing rivers, and beautiful forest, was created.
Cellar Door is a journey into the mythology, the mystery, and the beauty of Middle-earth. Sit back.
Close your eyes.
And imagine.
Hello and welcome to Cellar Door. I am Neisha T. Mulchan.
My name is Lewis.
And we are your co-hosts for Cellar Door, which is a scholastic podcast exploring the lore, mythology, fantasy, and history of J.R.R. Tolkien, his life, and the making of the anthology known as The Lord of the Rings, including the Silmarillion and all of the extra content that we were so blessed to receive over the last 20 years. So welcome to tonight's episode. Tonight's episode is a little bit different, correct, Lewis?
Yes, it is. It definitely is. Where you're not going to hear us narrating like we usually do in this. We're going to bring you articles and things that we come across in our research. Particularly Neisha brings up in her research because she finds these amazing articles about Tolkien and everything that's involved in the Tolkien mythology. Mm-hmm. And we're going to bring that to you because we want to share everything that we could bring out about Tolkien's mythology, life, and everything in general. And I think it's really fascinating to bring that up.
I think that as a lifelong Lothlorian, as far as I can throw myself, I believe that as a fan and as a fandom and as a whole, but as a part of the Tolkien Society, as a historian, and as just as myself as a human being, because we've had such a huge connection to the story arc, the storytelling, and the fantastical, magical existence and world building that Tolkien has given us. It's really important to understand why we connect to that so strongly. And to do that, I feel that understanding the historical background to how and why he himself, what connected to his, to these beautiful story arcs and how even his imagination, I think that will help us to understand a lot about our own selves and why we feel so strongly.
Especially in particular how his imagination started and how it sparked this amazing journey that he went across. Because let's all be real, the influence of a single person or a group of people in our lives, much less anybody else that's famous, author, historian, whatever the case may be, has a huge influence on that person's life and that person's direction that it's going to go. And Tolkien is no exception to that. And I think we're going to go into a little bit of detail on one of his major influencers, I think.
Yeah, today we're definitely going to do that. I did come across quite a few articles, which I always shoot to you, and we can definitely attach them as a link. Yes. For our listeners to go in and really enjoy as well. There are a lot of lighter articles where we get information about, the film series, etc. But I really wanted to highlight and understand a lot more about the people who were the influencers in his life and in his brother Hilary's life, and then tertiary. Secondary and tertiary influencers in the children and the grandchildren's life, because they've carried on the legacy.
Yes, they have.
and we know that Christopher is very strongly involved now as the next generation, bringing us the content, completing his father's work. And why was that so important? And why was that such a strong connection for Christopher? It's interesting because in this article written on June 9th, 2019, by Michael Toscano, named The Third Tolkien on View, The Third Tolkien on View, so that gives you an idea. It's by the kirkcenter.org. Kirk Center is a historical organization. Basically what they do is they really research and bring you very strong content about accurate history. It's amazing. I'm so happy I found them. Beautifully written article. It does take a little time to read through. The focus of this article, Louis, as you and I have discussed, is understanding the theological imprint that was embedded in the psyche of Ronald Tolkien from his childhood.
Yes.
And how did that even happen? And why was it so important for him that he cleaved so strongly to the theological perspective? Isn't it amazing?
Oh, it's 100%. It's one of those things, one of those moments in everybody's life where something is that everlasting memory in their life. In Tolkien's case, his everlasting memory of Mabel, his mother, was religion. That was his connection to her in her afterlife. It was his connection while he was suffering and going through all these crazy trials and tribulations in home after home, and finally when he was able to settle in one home in particular, but he never lost sight of her ever, and that's why it became such a major influence for her. And this article really it is beautifully written.
It really is beautifully written, and it's extremely startling beginning that Michael Toscano gives us, as we immediately find out that when Mabel passed away in 1904 from a diabetic coma, she was only 34, I believe, at the time of
very
death.
young.
So here's a dichotomous path that we're going to be going down today. She was married to a well-to-do husband. Arthur Rule was from a well-to-do family.
Yes.
So an influential and affluential family. So to be honest with you, there really was no reason for Mabel to have fallen into the level of poverty that she did. So what I came to understand very clearly is that when she passed away, Ronald and Hillary were 12 and 10 years of age at the time. They were passed legally into the guardianship of Friar Francis Xavier Morgan, who was a priest of the Birmingham Oratory. And that was a very new oratory.
Yeah,
and,
extremely. 60.
Yeah, and it was 60 years old. And if you think about that at
nothing.
The time, that's nothing. Because as you and I have talked about in our some other shows, you know, the establishment of Christianity and the factions of Christianity were some of the founding reasons for England as we know it today. So it was interesting to hear that this place had only existed that long. So here's the wow, startling fact. The fact is that she made the decision, and she put it into her will, that they were going to be passed to the priest.
Yep.
To Francis Xavier Morgan. She absolutely denied them or the rights of Arthur's family to have access to the kids, to the children. And do you recall why she denied them that access?
Because of her undying devotion to the church. she had
Two?
just converted 4 years before, but her conversion was something.
Controversial.
It was the same way that Tolkien connected to his mother as a religion. Mabel connected to religion as a way out of missing her deceased husband, and it was within that, the couple of years after the trauma that she suffered of her husband, the love of her life passing away the way that he did.
Well, she was quite young.
She was
Quite young, so.
and at least from everything I've read, they were in like complete love with each other. And I mean, he abandoned his family 100% because he refused to accept what they wanted, and he left their family in England to travel to South Africa, the farthest he could get away from his family, to be with the love of his life. And I think
to be able to establish a home with them that was their own, and to be able to give them all an opportunity to forge their own way and to find their own individualism. So that's already a very key point right there, because that was for Ronald and Hillary to have two parents who understood that fundamental principle of promoting individualism, promoting some level of free will, promoting some level of imagination and hopefulness. That was just really very refreshing to know that, and it made sense again because it's something that we see written into the lore later on. She was very, she Arthur's family was from a Protestant background, and as you well know, that has been the bane of the warring classes of the Christian faiths, and so it was definitely sacrilegious, as it were, because that's where the word came from. For her to have converted, that's where it came from, and for her to have converted and then to have baptized both the boys without their knowledge.
Yep.
So that was was pure true sacrilege. So the only way she felt with her passing that they could possibly continue in the legacy and to gain the gates of heaven, which is what was important to her, was for the boys to continue being raised in the faith, and this was the only way for it to happen.
That's fascinating, though.
And it is. And she raised the boys in the times that she had them to understand that this conversion, what the beauty of her faith. It wasn't an indoctrination, but in a sense, I guess it might have been seen that way. But she did it in a beautiful way, right? As far as I can read, I wasn't there, but as far as I can read from
articles that were written, people that have insight into that time.
Yeah, exactly, because there were family members who did actually give some background on these things. It seems like she did it in a way that was extremely fantastical, so that it really left beautiful imagery and a sense of belongingness to them.
And this was also a very different time in the church. This was when the church was trying to catch up to the times, especially the Church of England. The Church of England was very reformed, and it was different. Even the friar himself was a little unorthodox in his way, and it kind of sparked the interest of Tolkien, the way that he interpreted his faith, because that's where he got his influence for faith, because obviously his mother was a big part, but not really. It was a friar that gave Tolkien more education about faith than his mom did, because they had 8 years together of training and continuing education and everything, and being a major influencer in his life. So it was 8 years rather than 4 years, and that's a big that's a big chunk.
In the span of life as we know it today, in the era and the generation that we've been growing up in, and myself older than you, I feel that we have lost the wealth of gain and knowledge, and are slightly impoverished because we have a very social media engaged dynamic going on, and we learn so much from outside sources, and we have lost some of the connectability to the parent being the teacher in the home. And I do come from a background where that was something that still happened. So
it's a very cynical society, unfortunately. And even Tolkien began to see that, and you see it spring up in the Lord of the Rings novels.
Well, sure, absolutely.
You see that kind of that beautiful friendship that the hobbits have with each other, and then you see the influencers of other nations around Middle Earth, and you see how horrible they live with each other.
But let's step back, because you brought it up, right? Just think about Bree, Brandybuck.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful analogous way of looking at that cynicism, and is falling into a social dynamic of living for yourself, which was interesting because there were lots of hobbits there, but they took on a different personality once they were in a different social strata. So I love that. I love the idea that, oh my gosh, look how just that traversing that path, everything changed, and all of a sudden social dichotomy and trichotomy exists now, and that's just amazing to me.
I mean, even Merry and Pippin, when they left after the War of the Rings, they went back during the Fourth Age to the Shire, and they weren't able to reassimilate.
They weren't able to reconnect at all.
And they had to go back to Gondor. They died in Gondor because that's where they became. That's their change in personality completely changed them. And I think that's an important lesson.
They were heroes of the entire Middle Earth. Yeah. And they had come from a social structure where where the Shire folk didn't understand that faith and that content of experience, and so it was very hard for them to realize what they had been through. So we're digressing a bit, but great conversation. Woo, I love this. I was hoping that having this type of conversation would have us be able to recollect where we see Tolkien having applied the principles that he was learning. His mother was, first of all, she did not live impoverished for the first few years after the widowhood, because she hadn't converted at that time. So they certainly weren't poorly. And the movie, unfortunately, doesn't really explain that. But when we pick up with the impoverishment is when she had been cut off by the Tolkien estate, and unfortunately the boys with her. But I understood it. So one of the things that I love about this article is the fact that they were able to get access to those letters, and they did a beautiful side-by-side demonstration of the mother's letters that she wrote to the boys. So she had them, she lived with them, but she wrote letters to them so that they would still have her. And they would have experiences with her. And
that's incredible, though, having that wherewithal of herself, that she knows her own mortality, and she's teaching her children the importance to understand that she is mortal and that she will pass. And I think having that conversation, the way that how candid she was with the children, influenced Tolkien's life as well. And this article portrays that very much.
Really well. And the book that you and I just discussed a few moments ago, which I believe everyone would really benefit from reading, the Tolkien, Maker of Middle-earth. It's a collection of Tolkien's handwritten letters, sketches, inks, and watercolors. This is the book that came out of the the Morgan
City.
Library display, right, and museum in Manhattan, and oh my goodness, he was an amateur illustrator, as we all know, but he had great ability. Tolkien did, and was just illustrating since he was a child, because he always connected his visual, from what I understood,
Yes.
his visual to his written. So they were like symbiotic. There was no separating or extricating one from the other. He has a visual memory like I do. But when I write, I also visualize completely what I'm writing. So I understood that, his learning style, because it made sense to me.
And also, it goes back to having that society that he was part of. What was the most important thing to him was a writer, an illustrator, a musician, and then someone that can orate. And that's what he had. He had those 4 elements in every society that he was part of, in every group that he was part of, every brotherhood that he was part of, both in the Inklings and in I'm sorry, the name escapes me right now. But when he was younger, he had that. And every group that he was part of.
TCBS?
Yes, the TCBS.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry.
Just wanted to make sure. No, correct. And that was the beauty of that as well, because he still had those very strong symbiotic literary, artistic relationships that continued to spark his imagination, right, and his world building. I think that he is one of the ultimate world builders and role players, if that makes sense. Because
100%.
when we look at the movie, for instance, and again, that's just a romanticizing of his life, we can just imagine that Tolkien himself was a world builder. We knew that, but it looked like he was role playing constantly, and I feel like that's what that visualization of what you're imagining. You know what I mean?
His language. I mean, the way that we've interpreted his language in the first episode was we used his core belief in using your tongue, the way that you speak, as a method of music, a method of allowing yourself to create the world by pronunciating certain words certain ways, by giving the reader the world by just speaking the words that are written on there. You're able to illustrate the whole thing that's going on, and by doing that, he doesn't need to go into descriptions of everything. So he leaves this grand plan up to the imagination of you saying those words in your head, where you hear it and you build the world based on the words that are being said out loud. It's incredible. It's incredible, and that there's nobody that world builds like him, because nobody in history has ever done something similar to that.
No, because
in my opinion,
according to all the multiple historical reviews and perspectives, he took on the concept which is of course an impossible dream concept of creating a 1,000-year dynasty, and which according to Silmarillion, which with the later publishings we know of course spans more than what we call 1,000 years. However, it was a dynastic reflection of the mystery and the mystique of his characters and his language, and that role of the role playing and the world building. But even he himself recognized that, man, what I need to put together is going to take way longer than what I have the ability to do. So while he was looking to create this dynastic storytelling entire world, he also took the time to make them into shorter, readable, usable stories where he was able to give us something that gave us a short pence, basically, of that bigger world. Do you see what I'm saying? So,
yeah. And here we are 90 years later, still talking, conversing, having these literary accomplishments come out still about Middle-earth. I mean, we just renewed a TV series. It's the most expensive TV series ever made 90 years later after this book was released. That tells you everything right in there. It's incredible what he has sparked. He hasn't sparked the 1,000-Year Dynasty. He's sparked way more than that. He's sparked the imaginations of millions and millions of people out there. And there's nothing like that.
Well, the thing is you have 90 years of millions and millions. So if you can imagine, we must be going on a very large number at this time. In his world, he himself described it as a many 1,000-year mythological history, and recognizing Tolkien historians recognizing it as impossible for any human being to make a world in the way that he was looking to do it. But I think that he did it, right? As a fan, I feel that is something that it was accomplished. But later on, we were able to get more and more and more of it, and I believe there's so much more for us to have the pleasure of receiving. But again, it's up to the Tolkien, estate to make that decision. But I do feel with the
Look what he did, though. Look, I'm sorry to
no, go ahead.
But I think that what he did was incredible, and no other author has ever done something as similar as this, because he didn't just do what he did. He didn't just write a couple books. He built the mythology behind it. He built what the Greeks did, what the Romans did, what the Romans copied rather, what the Christians did in the Bible. He established all these things, but he was the sole person, him and Christopher, that were contributing to this world. Tell me another time where one or two authors are the only ones that contributed to build a world so multifaceted and so dynamic and so expansive. It's never been done before. I mean, Beowulf was a collaboration of almost 200 years of storytelling. The Roman mythology was almost 1,000 years in the making. So was Egyptian mythology. So was Christianity. It was like 300 years of writing.
Yes.
I mean, these were
all of those are world building. All of them. Everyone.
All of them were, but it wasn't one author. This was
no.
Spanned hundreds of years.
Not at all. It was a conglomeration of minds coming together to be able to create a doctrine that through literature, and that's what happened there. This is a little different because this is fantasy.
Yeah.
But it's not. But it's fantasy, but it's also a very spiritual philosophy, and I believe that people. The strong wealth of the fandom, the people who have been following for how many years, is because we all have, as we started out the show saying, we've all been affected, influenced, and changed by the knowledge and the spiritual knowledges that we've received through the readings. And, and for me, or for, I believe, both of us, making us better people.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I was just going to highlight one last thing as we move towards our end. I know we want to keep going on, but this is a lot of conversation, and we will definitely be having more of them. So in her, the article goes on to say that despite widowhood and poverty, Ronald and Hilary received from her, being Mabel, a happy life. In her own letters, admittedly, she comes off kind of like a Madeleine Bessette. Baby does like such a fairy when he's very much dressed up in white frills and white shoes. She's very flowery and very and very boisterous in her literary talent herself. She was a great writer. And so when she's describing the babies, you can feel her passion in it. It wasn't a stark and a pragmatic conversation, which was extremely common at the time. But she was a very romantic writer of letters. That was pretty brilliant. And so they definitely learned that from her.
Yes, definitely.
And so at times she was extremely cultured and learned, and educated the boys wonderfully, especially Ronald, because he was older. Learned from her a fine hand for lettering, basically. It's what it says here, which we know because we see that was so important to him. And when there were any mistakes, he would cross it through, which we see
Yes.
yeah, right. Remember, we still see it today because we saw examples of that at the museum. So that was fascinating. And so she also taught him the skills of illustration and with watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa!
Yep.
And that's, from young he's learning this. And then fluency with languages. So the fluency with Greek, Latin, and German.
It was the forefront for everything that he did.
That's just everything right there. Because each one of those carries a completely different
tonation,
lingual pattern. And then from there, they all sparked an entire, set of different languages throughout the world. So, whoa. So if you know all of these, you've learned pretty much the basis of most languages throughout the world, which is why he was so easily able to fall into linguistics and create his own language, because he lived the language.
And something that they don't mention in the article, but I found it fascinating, and I don't see it often presented, honestly, is the fascination with the Slavic, what do you call it?
Danish, the Finnish, because they reference it in the movie.
They slightly reference it, but they never really go into the detail how much of an influence Slavic languages was on him, and how he learned so much of it.
Well, this is right, but remember, she taught him these, but he went on to learn on his own. If he literally could recite Chaucer.
Yeah.
So believe if he so he could easily. So what I was referencing something about learning patterns earlier. So every person is completely individual in the ability to learn, and their learning style, the behavior of their learning, and their learning patterns. And because he was actually gifted with so many different learning styles, it seemed that Tolkien actually was able to learn across learning styles and patterns, and so had a very, very multi-dimensional, very strong multi-dimensional receptors. So the brain for him, it seemed to me, because of the way he writes and the language and his skill and talent and so much, wow, it just boggles my mind.
Yeah, it really does.
To imagine how Tolkien learned, processed, translated, digested, and then edified what he was learning. It's mind-boggling to me to have that kind of skill, to be born like that. But then, of course, to have had a mother who gave you enough information and knowledge to be able to digest in the way that he did. So,
agreed.
Absolute fascination. She definitely, and we'll close some last thoughts after this, she actually is the one who really indelibly impressed on both him and Hilary the fascination with words, their roots, the evolution of words, a love for music and literature, admiration for nature, which, of course, Tom Bombadil, and a sincere delight for the English countryside, even though it was being subject to modernization, which every ounce of what I just read is completely represented in Middle-earth.
100%.
And in the formation of Arda. Right?
Even the creation myth, everything.
Right, exactly. In the creationism, the creation myth of Arda. It's completely this. It's like this beautiful flowering and blossoming of all of this love that she showered them with, that they then went on to grace us with, that Tolkien went on to grace us with. Oof. Man,
Exactly.
man. Any last thoughts? Anything else you want to put out on the article?
Honestly, you hit all the main thing that I wanted to tackle was that whole thing that she brought, the music, she brought the fascination with watercolors, everything that you tackled all that already. So no, you said everything that I wanted to say in a much more elegant way. Thank you, Neisha.
Well, thank you, Lewis.
I just want to go over kind of so everybody understands where we're coming from doing a very narrated, very structured episode to doing one of these discussions. I believe that by doing one of these every other week, not only will you have some type of material every week about Tolkien's mythology and the legendarium itself, but you'll also see a little bit more information that we could present to you, and something that doesn't need to be more refined like we're doing on each of our narrative episodes. So please, I definitely recommend that you subscribe to the channel. Check us out on Facebook as well, because we have a lot of articles and different our artistical illustrations and everything that are going to be coming out on there that are going to highlight these points and further discuss these in the meantime from each of the episodes. So you're going to be able to get more content, and we're going to link you to all these articles that we find, any articles that we find super fascinating. We definitely want to link to you any podcast, any YouTube channels that in particular we want to highlight and we think are important.
Or fascinating and providing information that's something, wow, that is very relevant to what that it has, even helping us to be able to learn more about this, the legend of Tolkien.
Exactly.
And I think that with our next episode, we're going to go a little bit more into. We might jump ahead to one of the second, because right now with this series, what I believe we're going to do is look at the strongest influencers of the mythology, the lore, and the history that Tolkien creates, and how we find that these particular influencers completely laid out the foundation and the structure of what we know as the book series. And we'll try and give you some connectors to those. And as we said, the Scholastic is an unfolding of the lore itself, while this episode is looking at the influences, etc. So I in particular am very eager to discuss something very, very painful, and that would be the Battle of the Somme. And
which that'll be a fascinating discussion right there.
Yeah, probably emotional. So I believe that would be hopefully something that we work on with our next episode.
Yeah, and I'm coming from it from a very historical approach, because that World War I and World War II were probably one of my biggest historical background side. My father was a historian, and he made me read book after book after book after
very
book.
Smart.
Yeah, and from Panzer General to all any book that I could get my hands on about World War I and World War II, I've read. And it's the Battle of Somme.
I read a plethora of fiction, biographies and autobiographies written coming out of World War I and World War II as the background and the story arc. So of which there were many, and they were very dark and very difficult to deal with. But I feel that from my perspective, as we move along, mine will always be looking at the psychological, the psyche, and the social structures of the influencers. So.
And you're going to be getting two different perspectives, and this is going to be a very fascinating journey, I think.
Yep. I'm excited, and thank you everyone for sharing this experience with us tonight, or this day, or whenever you're listening to us.
Exactly. And again, my name is Lewis from Manbitesmedia.
And I'm Neisha from Diversely Geek.
And we are Cellar Door.